Hello and welcome to Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So much renewed interest in the JonBenet Ramsey case. So I'm going to go and uncover the secrets revealed in the first interview that the parents, John and Patsy, gave just days after JonBenet was found killed. The story was that JonBenet was discovered on the 26th of December. Since that time, John and Patsy have left Boulder, where they were living. They've lawyered up and they gave a television interview on the 1st of January 97. So just days after JonBenet was killed. Many people thought they should have been talking to law enforcement rather than TV at the time that this happened. Now, I love first interviews. They can be so revealing as to what happened. Because why? Well, number one, they're unpolished. So if we dig into what's going on, we're bound to see the most raw answers that we'll get. Because they're unpracticed, they haven't had time. If they are making up a story, they haven't had time to cross all the T's, dot all the I's in that story. So this should be very revealing when we look at the words that they choose to use. For the same reason, they're prone to slips. When they talk, they might let something out that they don't mean to let out, that in later interviews they might keep inside. And also, if they are, again, making up stories or have got some sort of cover story going on, then they might not have covered all the bases in their planning. So when they're asked an unexpected question, something might slip out there as well. So, it's the first interview. What is it that I want you to look at? Well, look for storytelling. Are they answering questions authentically and just saying what they experienced, what the events were? Or are they storytelling and going into telling us a much grander version of what happened, or even a deceptive version of what happened? That could be present in this first interview. Look for uncertainty, because if they haven't practiced the story, lying is really hard. Just making up a lie is very, very hard. So if they are being deceptive, then there might be some uncertainty when they're talking. The other thing to look for is contradictions. Does everything match up, or do they contradict themselves in this interview? Because it's unpolished, it's unprepared, then they may let out some contradictions. Two other things to warn you of. Number one, Patsy is under the influence of something. Take a look at this.
I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she. But if I were a resident of Boulder, I will tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there.
Yeah, logic would say she's heavily sedated, given the traumatic events that she has experienced. Could be alcohol involved in there as well, but we're going to treat what Patsy says, bearing that in mind. The other thing is that this interview does not exist in full anywhere. So I've pieced it together the best I can, looking at clips, looking at transcripts of the interview, looking what was reported at the time, to try and put together the interview as well as I could. Are we ready? Let's dig into that first interview. So the interviewer asks, why did you decide you wanted to talk now? And John answers first and says, well, we have been pretty isolated, totally isolated for the last 5 days, but we've sensed from our friends that this tragedy has touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people. And we know that there's many people that are praying for us, that are grieving with us, and we want to thank them, to let them know that we are healing, and that we know in our hearts JonBenet is safe and with God, and that the grieving that we all have to do is for ourselves and for our loss. But we want to thank those people that care about us. Interesting answer. So he's asked, why did you decide you wanted to talk now? John's first word is, well. I'll always advise you, look out for people who begin an answer to a question with, well. It means I'm going to tell you something unexpected. I'm going to explain something to you. I'm not really taking your question on and answering it straightforward. I'm flagging up here that I'm going to tell you maybe why that's a bad question, or maybe why my answer knows more than your question. So he flags it up with, well. And he says, we have been pretty isolated, and then corrects himself, if you like, and says totally isolated. Now, which one is it? Because pretty isolated means kind of isolated, sort of isolated, not 100% isolated. Pretty is a qualified word. And then he corrects it and says totally isolated. So for me, I think what he wanted to get across was we have been totally isolated, but the truth comes out in our words. So he says pretty isolated, and you would be pretty isolated in that experience that they've just had, but he wants to convince us that they have been totally isolated. So he says pretty isolated and then corrects that to totally isolated. What I think has gone on there, when someone corrects themselves, I tend to always think, let's look at the first thing they say first. That's probably the thing that's coming from their brain. The genuine, authentic thing is pretty isolated, and then he's aware enough to go, no, that's not strong enough. That's not what I want to get across. I want to say we have been totally isolated. He carries on and says, but we've sensed from our friends that this tragedy has touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people. And we know there's many people that are praying for us, that are grieving with us. Now, this is really the first thing of any meat that he has said here. The first thing we say tends to give away our priorities, the things that it is that we want to say. Now, our priorities aren't always true. They aren't always our authentic experience. It's the thing that's most important for us to say. So why have they gone into this interview? It's to get some sort of message across, and this is the thing that he wants to say. We've sensed from our friends that we're not in this alone, that other people are out there, that we're not alone, that people are on our side. Other people are on our side. And he brings that in massively. So the friends have told them this. So we've got friends, okay? Our friends are on our side, and they're telling us that there's many people praying for us, grieving with us. And to those people who are on our side, we want to thank them because we're nice people. We want to let them know we're healing, that JonBenet is safe and with God, and that we have to do some grieving for ourselves and for our loss. But we want to thank those people that care about us. So this really, for me, is about image management. Very strange place to be in when your daughter has been killed, 5-6 days previously, to be in image management. The image that people you would expect to have is as victims, yeah? So their daughter has been killed. They found their daughter dead inside their house in bizarre circumstances. And instead of them thinking that everyone is seeing them as victims of a tragedy and of a perpetrator, what they're wanting to do here is image manage something. Do they think that people think they are guilty? Do they think this is not a good look? Is that their priority? Why their priority is image management, to just control what it is that people think about them and what it is people are saying about them. It's an age-old concept that if you want to show people that they should be on your side, that they should be buying your product, or they should be believing what you say many other people, your peers, think that I'm a nice person or I've got a good product for sale. We see it all the time in advertising. And what they are wanting to do here, or what John is wanting to do here, is say many people believe us, many people are on our side, many people feel sorry for us. Everyone should feel the same, because if you don't feel the same as everyone else, is there something a bit strange about you? I noticed in John's first answer here, he's talking in joint pronouns all the time. He doesn't talk about himself, but he always talks about we. I'm presuming that's him and Patsy. We have been pretty isolated. We've sensed from our friends that's touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people. We know there's many people that are praying for us. All these joint words coming out. They are grieving with us, and we want to thank them, and we are healing. We know in our hearts that JonBenet is safe. That we all have to do is for ourselves and for our loss. We want to thank people that care about us. So they're very much showing a united front here. Now, our pronouns is something that we don't think a lot about when we say. So what I think is going on here is there is this unity between him and Patsy coming through here. He feels able to talk on behalf of the pair of them. John says, we've sensed from our friends that this tragedy has touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people. Now, that's a word, sensed, so that implies that they haven't said this is exactly what's going on. They haven't said, look, this is touched not just ourselves, but many people. It's just a sense that they've got. So it's maybe not been, in his words here, it's maybe not been explicit in what they've said. But then he goes on to say, we know there are many people that are praying for us. So he's got a bit of a contradiction there. Does he know these things are happening? Has he had conversations with friends about how the outside world is relying on? Or is this not authentic? Is this something that he's decided, again, in this image management thing, to say, I've got a sense that some people are on our sides, but what I'm now going to say is I know many people are playing for us, but these two things don't quite hang together. One is a sense, which is a feeling, which is a thought that something could be true, and one is knowing, which is a fact. We'll see just how much they join themselves up into other people, which is very strange, because he starts off by saying, again, we've been isolated. We've been either pretty isolated or totally isolated. But the word isolation there is very prominent in the first thing that he says. So isolation, being apart from everyone. But then within that isolation, he's talking about his friends and the sense that he's got from interacting with his friends, and the fact that his friends have been impacted by this tragedy, but also the many people that have been impacted as well, and the many people that are praying for them. And he wants to thank those people that care about us. Very interesting there. He does say, and he starts off by saying, been feeling isolated, but then he gives away signs that they're not so isolated with all these friends and these many people on their side. And he also adds in one last thing: JonBenet is safe and with God. Now, I'm not knocking religion, and I'm also not saying that these were not religious people. However, it's a very common thing when you want to get people on your side to invoke God, to talk about God being on your side, to talk about being God-fearing, because the idea is that if I talk about something holy and sacred like God, well, no, I can't be lying, because people would not lie when they talk about God, would they? They would not invoke God in a false way, because that would be a terrible thing to do if you're a believer in God. It also helps get people who believe in God's on your side if you start talking about the God that you share there. So this first thing that John said is pure image management, is pure about getting the public on their side. So why did you decide you wanted to talk right now was the question. I think the answer is because people are not on our side in general, and we want to get people on our side. It's very important to us. Now, even though that's a conclusion I can reach, that doesn't mean these guys are guilty. It means they want to change the narrative. They want to change the suspicion that they are being seen under. This is just days after JonBenet's death. Once John has said all that, Patsy comes in and says, we have just been overwhelmed by the cards and letters and visits, and people we haven't seen for years have come to call and be supportive in there. Many of them are parents, and they know and can feel our grief. So she starts off by saying, we have been overwhelmed by the cards and letters and visits, and people we haven't seen for years have come to call and be supportive. That's very at odds with John's, we have been pretty isolated, totally isolated. This is not isolation at all. So look, she does follow on from John in terms of saying that people are on our side. So she's sticking to the narrative, if you like, that they're setting there for them. But it is contradictory. She's saying we've been overwhelmed by cards and letters, and John has been saying we've been feeling pretty isolated. So this is inauthentic. There's something there that doesn't hang together. The two things can't be true. They can either have been overwhelmed by the cards and letters and visits from people, or they can be feeling isolated. It's inauthentic. We don't know what the truth is, but one of them in all of this is not telling the truth. But the message is just there from Patsy and from John. Lots of people are on our side. Why do they feel the need to say that? Because they realise lots of people are not on their side. John continues with the answer. But the other reason is that for our grief to resolve itself, we now have to find out why this happened. John mentions grief here. For our grief to resolve itself, we now have to find out why this happened. Now, in that very first answer, this is the third mention of grief between John and Patsy. So I do believe grief is there. They do have grief that their daughter is dead. This word has just slipped out in a very straightforward way. They're not talking about tremendous grief or trying to over-persuade us how much grief they have. It's just been three mentions that are straightforward grief mentions. So I do believe there is grief there. John starts this answer with the word but. He says, but the other reason is that for our grief to resolve itself, we now have to find out what this happens. Now, it starts with but. Have you ever heard the phrase, everything after the but, everything before the but is bull? It's not quite true. Everything before the but is less important than everything that comes after the but. Someone can say something they believe, but when they say but, That thing is more important to them. So this is more important to John. The other reason for our grief to resolve itself, we have to find out why this happened. Now, that could be quite reassuring. So what we've got in the concept here is that they're asked why they did the interview. He does a lot of image management to show that people are on our side. And really, what we want is to show people that lots of people are on our side, and we want to just calm down this suspicion that we are under. But more important, we want to find out why this has happened. That's all logical and understandable. But what interests me is John says we have to find out why this happened. So what interests John, in his own words, is why JonBenet was killed. Not who killed JonBenet. What's important to him is why JonBenet was killed. The interview continues, and they are asked, there has been some question as to why you hired a defence attorney. And John says, I know. Well, we were fortunate from almost the moment that we found the note to be surrounded by friends, our minister, our family doctor, a personal friend of mine who is also an attorney, and we relied on their guidance almost from that moment on. And my friend suggested that it would be foolish not to have knowledgeable counsel to help both us and with the investigation. So once again, we have John surrounded by people, so not isolated again, because he said he's been surrounded by friends, our minister, a family doctor, a personal friend who's also an attorney. Lots of good people have been around him, so he really wants to get across this image that the Ramseys are good people. They have friends. Their minister has been in touch. The family doctor, I mean, who's more trustworthy than the family doctor and the friend who is the attorney? But, and this is something I see with John to this very day, it's very much a feeling of not my fault. What I've done, if anyone's got questions about what's happened, has been not my fault. I've taken the advice of other people. It wasn't me that decided to do any of this. It wasn't Patsy that decided to do any of this. It's been other people in our circle that have given this guidance of things we can do. Now, this guy was a successful, very rich businessman. You do not get there without taking responsibility, without taking action, without having some strength of character. And yet what he wants to tell us here is that the fact that they hired defense attorneys was not his fault. It was the advice, the guidance of other people, and what wonderful people they are as well, including the minister and the family doctor. He does continue with his joint pronouns. We were fortunate from the moment we found the note, surrounded by friends, our minister, our family doctor. We relied on their guidance, and this was going to help both of us. So he's still talking about the pair of them. Apart from one thing, this attorney is not friends. He's a personal friend of mine. That implies it's someone that Patsy has no connection with whatsoever, because this attorney has nothing to do with Patsy. Patsy's joined into the minister. It's our minister, our family doctor. In fact, that could be wider than John and Patsy. That could be the entire family. But this attorney is a personal friend of mine. And almost from that moment on, my friend suggested it would be foolish for us not to have knowledgeable counsel. So John is actually belying something here, that this person who has advised them to hire defence attorneys has nothing to do with the rest of the family. It was a personal friend of mine. Very interesting there. The question that was asked was, there has been some question as to why you hired a defence attorney. Now, John does answer the question, but only after all this image management thing about how many friends he's got, how many trustworthy, good, virtuous people he has on his side, like the minister and the family doctor. Because once he's told us all that, he then says, it would be foolish not to have knowledgeable counsel to help both us and with the investigation. So he could have covered that off without any of this image management. There has been some question as to why you hired a defence attorney. He could have said, it would be foolish not to have knowledgeable counsel to help both us and with the investigation. That would be straightforward and direct. But there's all this filler in between, the image management stuff. Image management, just 5-6 days after JonBenet was found dead, is incredibly important to John. And really, what is the answer to that question? It would be foolish not to have knowledgeable counsel to help us. What does that mean? Help you what? He doesn't explain. He does not explain what help it is that they need. So he's hiding that, concealing that. He's certainly not revealing to us what sort of help they need from this knowledgeable counsel. it could be that they realise by this point that the police are suspecting them or digging into them a little bit, and that is the help that they need. And he realises with his image management head on that talking about that is not a good thing, so he wants to take that out the conversation and just say to help us. Interesting, if we look at the ordering that's come here, he mentions that the counsel, the defence attorney, was to help us and with the investigation. So first thing he mentions, the priority, the most important thing to him is given away in the way that the way that he lists things and the number that he orders things in. The most important thing in having this, the defence attorney, was to help us, and then secondly was to help with the investigation. So the defence attorneys aren't there to help with the investigation as much as help John and Patsy Ramsey. After John has said that, Patsy pipes up. And if anyone knows anything, please help us. For the safety of all the children, we have to find out who did this. Now that is irrelevant to the question. It was, why have you hired defence attorneys? And Patsy's saying, if anyone knows anything, please help us. For the safety of all the children, we have to find out who did this. Completely and utterly irrelevant to the question. Unless, in someone's head, they hired defence attorneys, and once more, it's looking slightly suspicious for the Ramseys because the thought is that hiring defence attorneys actually hinders the investigation. It's not full cooperation. It's not frank cooperation. There is a layer of protection for the Ramseys now. Now, that might be why she wants to convince us that if anyone knows anything, please help us. For the safety of all the children, we have to find out who did this. She joins herself into the outside world again. She doesn't want to find out who did this so that they can have their grief resolved, which is what John said earlier. She wants this, in fact, to be for the safety of all the children. Yeah, all the children, we have to find out who did this. I don't quite buy that. I think there's probably a more selfish reason why she wants to know that. And she's out of step with John here entirely, because we have to find out who did this, is what Patsy says. Remember, John said that we want to find out why this happened. Well, Patsy says we have to find out who did this. Interesting. John wants to know why. Patsy wants to know who. John comes in again and he says, not because we're angry, but because we have got to go on. Patsy starts saying, we can't. John picks up again. We cannot go on until we know why. There's no answer as to why our daughter died. Now, John says, not because we're angry. And his focus there is on the being angry. It's a statement in the negative, not because we're angry. What he's actually saying there is, we're angry. He doesn't say why, but he does say that he's angry, which is interesting. What is it that he's angry about? Because I would be reassured if he's angry that his daughter has been killed, savagely murdered. And it could be that. Is it that we're angry because we're under suspicion? That's why we've hired defence attorneys. I don't know. But what John is saying there is, we are angry. He then uses the phrase go on twice. We have got to go on, and this cannot go on until we know why. Interesting repetition. I want to know what it is go on means to him. Is it just proceed with his life? Potentially. And we can see here again is that John is talking about why, not who. He says this, we cannot go on until we know why. There's no answer as to why our daughter died. Not who killed her, which is what Patsy said. John, very interested in the why. But you can see, once more, John talking for the pair of them. We are angry. We have got to go on. We can't, says Patsy. So she's talking for the pair of them as well. And John says, we cannot go on until we know why. There's no answer as to why our daughter died. So the pair of them are together. Although they're saying some slightly different things, the pair of them do feel together. The next question the interviewer asks is, when you return to Boulder, you will sit down with the Boulder police? John says, oh, absolutely. We want them to know everything possible that could help them. And it's not said everything possible that could help them. When he says it, he says, we want them to know everything possible that could help them. And Patsy says, everything. And she says it, everything, like one word. Everything. Whatever they want, whatever anyone wants, we will cooperate. So John's answer to, will you sit down with Boulder police is, oh, absolutely. Regular viewers will know that absolutely is a word that gets my deception detection going quite a lot. Look, I'm not saying when someone says the word absolutely, they are lying. It just appears in deception so often. And he repeats it twice. He doesn't just say yes. Yes, we'll cooperate with the police. He just says absolutely, absolutely. So will he? I would, just on the basis of that, would not put any faith whatsoever that he's going to sit down with Boulder police when he returns there, because those two absolutely's make me think, I'm not so sure. He carries on. We want them to know everything possible that could help them. Now that sounds great, doesn't it? We want them to know everything possible that could help them. But just break down this sentence. It's not we're going to tell them everything that can help them. It's just we want them to know everything possible that could help them. And it's only the things that could help them that they want them to know. They don't want them to know everything. So implicit within that is there's some things that they want to hold back on that they feel would not help the police. It's a very interestingly worded sentence. We want them to know everything possible that could help them. It's not an absolute guarantee of cooperation. It's not volunteering all the information that could help. It's just a wish. We want them to know everything possible, and it's a qualified wish that could help them. Patsy goes further, and this could be the medication that she is on. Everything, whatever they want, whatever anyone wants, we will cooperate. So Patsy's going to absolutes here. So again, when someone goes to absolutes, I always doubt they're telling the truth. And we will cooperate is how she finishes that. We will cooperate. That should be unsaid. If your daughter has been murdered, you don't need to tell us you're going to cooperate with the police. You just cooperate with the police. It should be unsaid, but for some reason, Patsy feels the need to tell us that they are going to cooperate. The interview continues with, are you fully convinced that your daughter was kidnapped by some outsiders outside your family or circle of friends? John says, yes, we don't, it's just so hard to know, but we are. Our family is a loving family. It's a gentle family. We have lost one child. We know how precious their lives are. John's first word in that answer is yes. So it's a yes or no question. It's a question that can either be answered with a yes, a no, or a don't know. Are you fully convinced that your daughter was kidnapped by some outsiders outside your family or circle of friends? And John's first word is yes. Generally, an indication of truthfulness. So there we would say, yeah, John is fully convinced your daughter was kidnapped by someone outside the family or circle of friends. But let's dig into that answer a little bit more. He says yes. Could have left it at that. But instead he says a little bit more. He says, we don't, it's just so hard to know, but we are. Our family is a loving family. It's a gentle family. We have lost one child. We know how precious their lives are. That's a little bit of a resume statement. Once again, image management at the heart of what John says, telling us how great his family is. It's a loving family. It's a gentle family. We know how precious their lives are. But the question was asked about, who is the identity of the killer? Do you know, or do you have any ideas? And instead of going and expanding on that, he tells us what a great family he has. It is a detour. He has been asked a question about the identity of the killers, and he's gone on a detour and spoke about how great his family is. John says, yes, and then he says, I. And that's, I think, maybe the first time we've heard John say an I in this interview, but he doesn't hold on to that I. He corrects himself and says, we don't. Now that interests me. Why was he going to talk for himself, but then corrected to talk for the pair of them there? Is this something that only he knows? Are they as together as they seem? Because he seemed to be going to talk for himself, very much like when he spoke about his personal friend. And then he goes to join it up to the we don't. You'll notice the question was asked, are you fully convinced that your daughter was kidnapped by some outsiders outside your family or circle of friends? And the answer that came back is about the family. Our family is a loving family. It's a gentle family. These are not quite direct rebuffals that my family was not involved, but he does talk about what a great family he has. But notice, in that answer, friends are not mentioned. He's asked, are you fully convinced that your daughter was kidnapped by people outside your family or circle of friends? He says what a great family he's got. He doesn't mention friends at all. Why is that? We're going to see soon how Patsy describes finding the infamous ransom note. It's a fascinating answer to the question that she was asked. If you do like the JonBenet Ramsey case, if it does interest you, you'll find a lot more content here on this channel, including a breakdown of that ransom note, who wrote the ransom note, and also the 911 call that Patsy Ramsey made. What is it in the words of the ransom note? What is it in the words of the 911 call that we can learn more about what happened to JonBenet Ramsey? You will find those here on this channel. If you do like this, if you're getting something from it, the like button goes a long way to helping share this with other people that are interested in the JonBenet Ramsey case. If you want more episodes like this, if you hit the subscribe or follow buttons, you will get them when they are released. If you want a little bit more, then why not consider becoming a member of the channel on YouTube or a subscriber on Spotify? That means that you can get episodes like this before anyone else and exclusive bonus episodes too. For example, there are some parts of this interview that I don't have time to put in this episode, so I'm going to do a members only one, digging into some more of the answers that John and Patsy Ramsey gave in this very first interview. Let's carry on with that interview then. The next question is asked is, Mrs. Ramsey, you found the note. Was it a handwritten note? 3 pages. And here's Patsy's answer, and it's a long one. Patsy says, I didn't. I couldn't read the whole thing. I just gotten up. We were on it was the day before Christmas, and we were going to go visiting, and it was quite early in the morning, and I had got dressed and was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. And we have a back staircase from the bedroom areas, and I always come down that staircase, and I am usually the first one down. And the note was lying across the 3 pages, across the run of one of the stair treads, and it was kind of dimly lit. It was just very early in the morning, and I started to read it, and it was addressed to John. It said, Mr. Ramsey, and it said, we have your daughter. And it just wasn't registering, and I may have gotten through another sentence. We have your daughter. And I don't know if I got any further than that. And I immediately ran back upstairs and pushed open her door, and she was not in her bed, and I screamed for John. It's a very, very long answer for quite a simple question, which was, Mrs. Ramsey, you found the note. Was it a handwritten note? 3 pages. She could have answered very simply by saying, yeah, it was a handwritten note, 3 pages long. Instead, we got that very long answer. Only once does she deal with the question in the middle of it. She says 3 pages, right in the middle of something that she's talking about. She says, and the note was lying across the 3 pages, across the run of one of the stair treads, and it was kind of dimly lit. You'll notice she avoids talking about the handwriting at all. She was asked, was it a handwritten note? And she doesn't say that the note was handwritten. Why not? And this is a very, very long answer, and it's telling a story. Why does she want to tell a story when she has been asked a very simple question that could be answered very simply? It was 3 pages long and it was handwritten. Does she tell the whole story about finding it? One of the things could be, if we've got a story ready to roll, if we've got something that is really important for us to say, whether that is true or whether that is deceptive, we will fit it in to answer a question because we've prepared for this. We've got this ready to say, and I'm going to use what I've prepared. Rather than just answering the questions, I'm going to come out and tell my story. And this is such a story. It's scene setting. There's some jumps in time in it. There's some really interesting things that are there. It could be that this is a very traumatic event for her, and a lot of this waffle that is there, because quite frankly, most of this is irrelevant waffle, is to delay getting to that horrible part where she found the note and found JonBenet was not in bed. And it could be that. But there's a lot of scene setting in this that I think means it's something different. Let's start with the tenses. Quite often when someone is making up a story, they will slip between past and present tense because they're making up the story in their mind as they speak. They're experiencing it from a different part of their brain than where things that happen to us are stored. And so sometimes when we're doing that, we will slip into present tense. But listen, Patsy never does that there. There's lots of past tense in there. It's reliably all in past tense. I couldn't read the whole thing. It was the day after Christmas. We were going to go visiting. It was quite early in the morning. I had got dressed, was on my way to the kitchen. The note was lying across the stair treads. It was kind of dimly lit. It was very early in the morning. It was addressed to John. I pushed open her door. She was not in bed. I screamed for John. The tenses there are very good. There's nothing there that is worrying me because it's in the present tense. And if you look at her pronouns as well, because this has all been joint pronouns from them so far, but really everything here pronoun wise is absolutely fine from Patsy too. She talks about her and what she experienced at the time. She was on her own. I couldn't read the whole thing. I had just gotten up. I had got dressed. I started to read it. I may have gotten through another sentence. I don't know if I got any further than that. I ran back upstairs. I screamed for John. She is reliably only talking for herself, apart from when it's appropriate. We were going to go visiting. We have a back staircase. So her tenses are really good and her pronouns are really good as well. Apart from one. While she talks about herself a lot, I couldn't read the whole thing. I had just gotten up. I had got dressed. That whole sentence is, I had got dressed and was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. And there's a missing I there. It could have been, I had got dressed and I was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. So was she really on her way to make some coffee? Sometimes we drop pronouns, but she's reliably used her own pronoun I so often there that it's very noticeable that one is dropped there when she talks about being on the way to the kitchen to make some coffee. Some other things that I notice in this kind of rambling answer there. She says, I didn't, and then she restarts, I couldn't read the whole thing. So we've got one of these restarts, a restating of the thought, really. And again, I tend to go with what's at the beginning. I didn't read the whole thing, or I couldn't read the whole thing. They're two very different things. Which one is true? I would go with the first one. She said she didn't read the whole thing, not that she couldn't read the whole thing. She uses the word just, very much like absolutely, a word that gets my interest. I just gotten up. Now, why in all of this does she feel the need to tell us that she just gotten up? One of the possibilities that she feels the need to tell us this quite irrelevant thing in the whole story is that she hadn't gotten up. Part of her story is that she had just gotten up. She hasn't been awake any earlier. She hasn't been awake all through the night or anything like that. She wants us to know, and she mentions it specifically, that I just gotten up. I do not know what we were going to go visiting means. It's, again, it might be the sedation, but she could just say we were going visiting and we were heading out for the day. But we were going to go visiting is a curious way of wording things. She says, we have a back staircase from the bedroom areas and I always come down that staircase. I always come down that staircase. Why does she feel the need to tell us which staircase she uses every single morning? Don't know. But she wants us to know that where that note was, well, seems to be that it was left specifically because it was left by someone who knows she always comes down that staircase. That would be what I am getting from those words. There's no need to tell us which staircase you always come down in the morning. What we're really interested in is the staircase that you came down that morning. And she doesn't say that's the one she used. She just says, I always come down that staircase. So instead of talking about that day, that horrific day when she went down the staircase and there was a ransom note saying her daughter had been taken, she just talks in general. I always come down that staircase. And it's the same with when she says, I am usually the first one down. She doesn't say she was the first one down that morning, just that she is usually the first one down. So I'm getting some red flags around this story that perhaps all is not quite what it seems. Patsy wants to tell us it was quite early in the morning. She says it twice. It was quite early in the morning and it was just very early in the morning and I started to read it. Was it early in the morning? Was it late at night? Was it as early as you make it out to be? We don't know, but for some reason she wants to tell us that she has a sense of the time that this happened. Put that in with I'm the first one up as well. And then there's some uncertainty in her words in this bit here. It just wasn't registering. I may have gotten through another sentence. I can't, but we have got your daughter and I don't know if I got any further than that. Real uncertainty there around the note. Around how much of that note she read. She wants to tell us that she did not read all the note. It's very important for her to tell us that she did not read all that note. Why is that? And this last part of the story, and I immediately ran back upstairs and pushed open her door, and she was not in her bed, and I screamed for John. This is like a script of directions. You'll notice it's all action, no emotion. There's no feeling put into this whatsoever. It's I immediately ran back upstairs and pushed open her door, and she was not in bed, and I screamed for John. It's action, 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 action. No thought process and no emotion expressed there whatsoever. But Patsy talking about that ransom note is the first thing that made me go, what is going on here? Because the rest of this I can make a lot of sense of. The image management doesn't mean they're guilty. It means they know what people are saying about them, and it's important for them to manage that and try and change that narrative. But around this ransom note and that story of finding the ransom note, I'm finding a whole load of red flags. The next question is, John, you subsequently read the note. Was there anything in there that struck you in any sense? And John says, well, no. I mean, I read it very fast. I was out of my mind. And it said, don't call the police. You know, that type of thing. And I told Patsy, call the police immediately. And I think I ran through the house a bit. So John starts with well again. He does his well, which is, I'm not really going to answer your question. I'm going to tell you why it's a bad question, why my answer is better than your question. Well, but he does say no straight away again. So was there anything there that struck you in any sense? And he says, no. That's his answer. Again, very much like Patsy, there's a bit of a partness now. He's talking about himself. I mean, I read it very fast. None of this we there anymore. I was out of my mind. No, we were out of our mind. I was out of my mind. I told Patsy to call the police immediately, and I think I ran through the house a bit. So John, very much like Patsy at this point, is talking about himself and his reactions. They're not talking as a couple anymore. He says, I told Patsy, call the police immediately. So we've got a bit of commanding, ordering language there, controlling language. I told Patsy, call the police immediately. Why could he not call the police immediately? Why was it he told Patsy to call the police immediately? And also, I told Patsy, call the police immediately. Sounds great, but doesn't say that they did call the police immediately. It's not Patsy called the police immediately. It's I told Patsy, call the police immediately. And we've got this word immediately in there as well. Call the police immediately. Why not just call the police? What are we called the police? Why do they need to tell us how quickly they did it with this word immediately? Because you'll notice this is not the first time we've seen immediately around this ransom note. Patsy said, I immediately ran back upstairs. Did they do these things immediately? Did this all play out over a longer period of time? Is that why they feel the need to tell us these things happened immediately? It could be. And then once more, we got a bit of uncertainty in this story. John saying, I think I ran through the house a bit. So he thinks he did. Not very sure. He might not have. That's what I think means. And a bit. Ran through the house a bit. So he thinks he did something, but not very much of something. Why is that important for him to say? These guys, they do quote the ransom note, but they only quote 3 parts of it when they talk about it. I don't know, maybe at this point the ransom note was not public. I don't know when the ransom note was made public. It could be law enforcement have said to them, do not divulge the contents of the ransom note right now. It's very important to us. But they are very limited on quoting of the note. But John mentions don't call the police. Patsy mentions that it was addressed to just Mr. Ramsey, and also the fact we've got your daughter. But they're very limited in quoting of the note. Certainly none of the nutty stuff that was there around sex, around strange bags, around resting up. None of that is mentioned by these guys in this interview at all. The question is asked, was there anything in there that struck you in any sense about the ransom note? John says no, and once again then we have all that filler after it. I mean, I read it very fast, I was out of my mind, and it said don't call the police, that type of thing. I told Patsy, call the police immediately, and I think I ran through the house a bit. What do you notice there? It's another detour. Was there anything there that struck you in any sense about the ransom note? And John talks about their reaction, not about the note. He wants us to know that they called the police immediately, and he wants us to know that he ran through the house a bit, although it's not very convincing language. So from all of this, I don't think the ransom note was found like they are saying in this interview. I think there was some time taken, certainly between finding the ransom note, reading the ransom note, whatever it was, and calling the police. Basically, between knowing their daughter, something had happened to their daughter, and calling the police, I don't think was as immediate as John and Patsy claim it is in this interview and in subsequent interviews as well. The next thing Patsy says is, we went to check our son. And John says, checked our son's room. Sometimes she sleeps in there, and we just were, Patsy says, we were frantic. So Patsy says, we went to check our son. Perfectly normal thing to do if you find a ransom note saying we have your daughter and you've got a son in the house as well, and you know your daughter's gone, you go and check your son. So Patsy says, we went to check our son. And John says, we checked our son's room. Sometimes she sleeps in there. So Patsy went to check the son. Fair enough. John says, checked our son's room, which is a very different thing. He didn't check his son. He checked the room to see if JonBenet was in there. Two very different things. So we're seeing, again, although these guys are using lots of we and ours pronouns, when we actually dig into it, there are some real differences there. Patsy saying we went to check on Burke, and John saying, no, we didn't. We checked Burke's room. The next question they are asked is, you were asked shortly thereafter for a hair sample and a writing sample, blood sample. Who else was asked for this? And John says, well, yeah, his well is there again. Patsy and I, Burke, our son, who is 9, every family member. He's asked, including your 2 elder children. He says, uh-huh. Any friends? John says, I don't know. Now, this all seems really straightforward to me. Things I'm not quite happy with there are the aha rather than yes. That seems a little bit less committed than the yes, but it is still an affirmative answer. I don't know is in there as well. When John's asked about, have your friends been asked to do this? And he says, I don't know. I don't know is generally a reliable indicator that someone is telling us the truth. Truthful people have no problem saying I don't know. People who are telling a lie, they think that saying I don't know shows weakness in their story, so they have to know, they have to put some things in there. But this generally seems very straightforward. They're asked, did you give the samples? And John says, uh-huh. And he's asked, oh, really? Because the word was they thought you were too grief-stricken. So both of you gave samples? And John says, yes. So we've got that aha there, and then we've got yes. And look, did they give samples? I don't know the absolute ins and outs and timelines of the JonBenet Ramsey story. So did they give those samples? Because John's aha there again is that sort of slangy, less committed than yes. And then both of you gave samples, and he says yes. He doesn't expand on that at all by saying, yes, we gave samples. Yeah, we gave them everything they wanted. He just says the word yes. So let me know in the comments or in social media. All the links are in the show description if you want to get in touch on social media. Had they given samples at the time of this? Because I think in the wording there, I'm not sure they had given full samples. The interviewer says, were you offended by that? John says no. And Patsy goes off piste a little bit and says something different. She says it was difficult, but they need to know. I mean, our handprints are all over the home, so they need to know if there are other ones. So John's more direct there. He's asked, were you offended by that? He says no. Patsy says it was difficult, but I could see the reasons why they're doing it. So John, that very curt no, closes the whole thing off. He doesn't feel the need to expand. He doesn't feel the need to detour either, though. And Patsy does have a little bit of that detour there by explaining why the handprints are important, because there may be ones all over the house. However, Patsy mentions the handprints. They were not asked about handprints at all. The question was hair samples, writing samples, blood samples. So again, did they provide everything that was needed at that time, or did they give some kind of prints, handprints, fingerprints? Because they were asked about hair samples, writing samples, blood samples, and Patsy only deals with handprints. What I do know is there's some doubt in Patsy. She's open to the fact that there could be other handprints there that are important, because she says if there are other ones. So she is open to the fact that there could be other handprints in the house. And then we get this from John. One of the things they told us, we had some initial reactions as to who might have been involved, and they said, well, that is good, but we don't want to draw the focus in tight yet. We've got to look at everything. Not a very eloquent answer from John there, but there are some really interesting things in his answer. He says, we had some initial reactions as to who might have been involved. Reactions is interesting, not thoughts, not ideas. Something that you react to is an instinctive thing. And instincts are good. And this is what he's talking about here. When their daughter was found dead, in John's own words there, they had some reactions as to who might have been involved. So for all the talk about the great virtuous friends that he's got that are all on his side, and the minister and the family doctor and everything like that, somewhere he has some reactions as to who might have been involved. Now remember, this is John who's been talking about why it happened. This is the first time he's mentioned who. But what John is saying there is that the initial, so just after JonBenet was found dead, he had some initial reactions as to who might have been involved. Involved is interesting. It's not who might have done it, but it's who might have been involved. So that means more than one person. If people are involved in it, tends to mean more than one person. And he thinks that he certainly had some initial reactions as to who might have been involved. And then the rest of it just doesn't flow. I think what he's wanting to say is, we pointed the police to people we consider suspects, but we're still suspects. But hey, that's fine. That's how the police operate. They don't want to focus in too tight yet. We've got to look at everything. But he doesn't say it very well. He doesn't state it very well. I do not think he likes being considered a suspect at all. Another question is asked of them. The police said a couple of days ago to assure other residents of Boulder that there is no killer on the loose here. You can be assured everything is under control. You believe it's someone outside your home. Patsy says there is a killer on the loose, and John says absolutely. Patsy says, I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she, but if I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there. So when they're asked, you believe it's someone outside your home, you don't really go with this thing that there is no killer on the loose. Patsy says there is a killer on the loose, and John says absolutely. Well, I've spoken about absolutely already. It's just a bit too convincing sometimes for my liking. But look, this is factual. Whether it was one of those two that murdered JonBenet, whether it was a friend, whether it was just a random person from outside the home, this is factual of what they are saying. It's not really reassuring. It's just the truth. Patsy says, I don't know, twice. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she. Generally, as I've said, I don't know, I believe. It reassures me when someone says, I don't know. And I would be reassured there as well. I say would be reassured because she says, I don't know if it's a he or a she. Now, potentially this is just the sedation there, and she's kind of rambling a little bit, but interesting that she brought up those two divisions. She could have said, I don't know if it's a black person or a white person. She could have said, I don't know if it's a thin person or a fat person. I don't know if it's an old person or a young person. But she goes to, I don't know if it's a he or a she. Does she suspect a woman? Is that why she's brought he or she into it? Interesting choice of words. And then she says, if I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep your babies close. If I were a resident of Boulder. She was 5 days ago, but she really considers herself not to be a resident of Boulder now. Once more, we've got some avoidance of the question, and the question was about who is the person that did this. You believe it's somebody outside your house is what's put there, and they say there's a killer on the loose. I don't know who it is. I would tell my friends to keep your babies close to you, but you believe it's someone outside your home. Absolute tumbleweed to that answer. Why is that? The next question, inevitably, speculation on talk shows will focus on you. It's got to be sickening. John says, it's nauseating beyond belief. And Patsy says, America has just been hurt so deeply with the tragic things that have happened. The young woman who drove her children into the water, and we don't know what happened with the O.J. Simpson. And I mean, America is suffering because we have lost faith in the American family. We are a Christian, God-fearing family. We love our children. We would do anything for our children. So once more, we've got this resume statement from Patsy. We are a Christian, God-fearing family. We love our children. We would do anything for our children. Again, she's invoking God there by talking about how Christian they are, how God-fearing they are. But I think this is potentially just the image management stuff coming up after this quite strange thing about the woman who drove her children into the water and the O.J. Simpson case. John deals with it more directly by saying the speculation is nauseating beyond belief. Beyond belief is convincing us, but nauseating is a very visceral word that's come up from him. So I'd be tempted to think that he does find it sickening that the focus is on them. In fact, we've seen that in all of his wording. He hates the fact that the focus is on them. He hates that so much he's trying everything in his power to say what great people they are, what virtuous people they are, and how many people believe in them and how many people are praying for them. The interviewer asks, do you truly think the perpetrator will be found? And John says, yes, he has to be found. He's asked, do you think it's a single individual? He says, yes, in my heart, I do. Why in his heart? Why not his head? What is going on with that answer there? I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's a very interesting choice of words. Do you believe it's a single individual? Yes, in my heart, I do. And that is what I'm going to look at in the very first interview with John and Patsy Ramsey. So where am I at? What conclusions have I got? I see a lot of honesty in that. I do see a lot of honesty there, and I see a lot of image management, but I think that is kind of understandable in the most part. But I do see some red flags. That includes that image management where they're just trying too hard to say what a great family they are and what virtuous friends they have. It may be understandable that maybe that they have decided they want to control the narrative, but there's really no need for them to try so hard to convince us about what great people they are, what a great family they have. So that's a bit of a red flag for me. My other red flag is, who do they suspect? Because you'll notice when I pointed out those detours where they go off on one, that's very often when they're being asked about the identity of the killer. Do they suspect someone strongly? Or do they know a little bit more about what went on? Which is why when they're asked about who killed JonBenet, that's when they go to do the, well, I'm going to detour now and say what a great family I have. I'm going to detour now and talk about something else. I'm going to really avoid taking head on any questions about the identity of the kidnapper or any questions about the identity of the killer. So do they suspect someone? It's very early days. It seems to me they have a suspect or suspects in mind. Listen, the storytelling around the finding of the ransom note is really noticeable, especially when a lot of the time they've been quite sharp and direct with their answers. That story from Patsy around finding the note, not massively believable. John's story about his reaction to the note as well, not massively believable. My conclusion on that is I don't think they acted immediately. Whatever led to that, whether it was finding the note and they found the note much earlier and decided that they were going to go, what do we do here? Do we call the police? Do we call our friends? Do we do something else? Or whether it's more nefarious than that, I don't know from what is said there. But I do not think they found the ransom note on the stairs, ran up, saw JonBenet was gone and called the police immediately. They tried too hard to convince us that's what happened. They tried too hard to convince us the times of when those things happened. So I don't think they reacted immediately to finding out that JonBenet was gone. But I don't see them hiding any personal guilt. I do see them trying to avoid talking about who they think was responsible, but personal guilt, I don't see that in John and Patsy at all. And what do you think? Do let me know in the comments if you can, or get in touch on social media. Neveratruerword.com is the website. You'll find all the social media links there, along with more videos and podcasts, including more on the JonBenet Ramsey case. You can also join the Facebook group, sign up for the newsletter if you want, where we discuss things like this all the time. Neveratruerword.com, and we'll see you soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.